quiet Missouri evening, a 9-year-old girl vanishes while walking home, just a few hundred feet from her front door. Within hours, an entire town is searching. What no one knew was that the truth behind her disappearance was not only close, it was unimaginably dark. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to Noir Crime 88. We upload a new true crime story every second day, and you won't want to miss the cases we're about to uncover. On October 21, 2009, the small town of St. Martins, Missouri, was rocked by a crime so chilling, it would haunt the community for years to come. Elizabeth Olten was just 9 years old, bright, full of life, and loved by everyone who knew her. That evening, she set out to walk home from a friend's house. It was a path she knew well, barely a football field away from her own home. But she never made it back. The search for Elizabeth quickly became frantic. Neighbors left their homes, volunteers formed search parties, and authorities combed the area with flashlights and dogs. But in cases like this, time is everything. And as the hours dragged on with no sign of the little girl, fear began to eclipse hope. This wasn't just another missing child case. The truth, when uncovered, would reveal a chilling crime committed not by a stranger, not by some faceless predator, but by someone shockingly close to home. Elizabeth Olten was born in December 1999. She was the kind of child every parent hopes for, sweet, playful, with an innocence that radiated through her smile. She loved makeup, music, and playing dress-up. At 9 years old, she had that perfect blend of childhood wonder and a budding sense of personality. Her family lived in a small, tight-knit community in Cole County, Missouri. St. Martins wasn't the kind of place where people worried about crime. Neighbors trusted one another. Kids could play outside without constant supervision. Parents felt safe letting their children walk short distances. On that October evening, Elizabeth went to a friend's house just down the street. It was supposed to be an ordinary playdate, the kind kids have every day. As daylight faded and Elizabeth started heading home, no one could have imagined the nightmare that was about to unfold. Elizabeth's home was only a few houses away. The short walk should have taken minutes. But when she didn't arrive, her family immediately knew something was wrong. Elizabeth wasn't the kind of child to wander off or ignore her curfew. Her mother reported her missing right away. And within hours, police, firefighters, and volunteers were out in force. The woods around the neighborhood were combed. Creeks, ditches, and backyards were searched again and again. Still, there was no trace. It was as if Elizabeth had vanished into thin air. But someone knew exactly what happened. And that someone was far closer than anyone could have imagined. As searchers scoured the neighborhood that night, one home sat just a few yards away from Elizabeth's path. Inside was a 15-year-old girl named Alyssa Bustamante. On the surface, Alyssa looked like an ordinary teenager. But beneath the surface, her life was deeply troubled. She had grown up with instability, her parents struggled with addiction and had been in and out of prison. Alyssa was raised mostly by her grandmother. In school, she was known as quiet, sometimes moody, and often drawn to dark interests. She kept journals where she wrote about death, pain, and anger. To those who didn't know her well, she appeared like a typical teenager navigating a difficult life. But in reality, Alyssa harbored thoughts that were far more sinister. On October 21, as Elizabeth was leaving her friend's house, Alyssa saw an opportunity. For weeks, she had been entertaining violent fantasies. In fact, days before the crime, Alyssa had dug 2 shallow graves in the woods behind her home. She didn't know exactly who her victim would be, but she was already preparing. That evening, Alyssa lured Elizabeth off the road and toward the woods. Elizabeth was trusting. She knew Alyssa casually from the neighborhood and had no reason to be afraid. But what followed was an act of cruelty so shocking, it stunned even hardened investigators. In the woods, Alyssa strangled Elizabeth with her hands. When the little girl struggled, Alyssa stabbed her multiple times with a kitchen knife she had brought with her. Then, to silence her cries, she cut her throat. Elizabeth's final moments were marked by confusion and fear, her life brutally stolen before she even reached her 10th birthday. Afterward, Alyssa dragged Elizabeth's body to the grave she had dug days earlier and covered it with dirt, leaves, and debris. When the crime was done, Alyssa returned home as if nothing had happened. While search parties frantically combed the woods outside, she was inside, writing in her diary. And what she wrote was horrifying. In a chilling entry later discovered by investigators, Alyssa described the murder as if it were an experiment. She wrote, "I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my God, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable." She ended the entry with a single word, LOL. This diary would become one of the most disturbing pieces of evidence in the case, showing a complete lack of empathy or remorse. Meanwhile, outside her home, Elizabeth's family was living every parent's nightmare. Her mother and siblings joined the search, calling her name into the night. Police dogs traced scents through the woods, but the body was hidden too well. Every hour that passed felt like an eternity. By the following day, October 22nd, suspicions began to turn toward Alyssa. She had been interviewed by investigators during the search, and her behavior stood out. She seemed oddly detached, even casual. Officers noticed cuts and scratches on her arms. When questioned, she claimed they were from a fight with a tree branch. But detectives weren't convinced. They knew something wasn't adding up. The shocking truth was about to come out. By the morning of October 22nd, the search for 9-year-old Elizabeth had become urgent. Hundreds of volunteers, neighbors, and law enforcement officers combed through woods, fields, and creeks. Helicopters circled overhead, while search dogs tracked every scent. But even as the search expanded, investigators began to focus on one person, 15-year-old Alyssa Bustamante. When detectives first spoke to Alyssa, her answers were unsettling. She admitted she had seen Elizabeth on the evening she vanished, but claimed the little girl had gone straight home afterward. Investigators quickly noticed the inconsistencies in her story. More troubling were the fresh scratches and dirt stains on her clothes. Alyssa brushed it off, saying she often played in the woods. But there was something else. Neighbors reported seeing Alyssa digging in the wooded area just days before Elizabeth went missing. That detail stuck with detectives. Why would a teenager be digging holes in the woods unless she was hiding something? Sheriff's deputies obtained a search warrant for the Bustamante property. As they combed through Alyssa's room, they discovered dark drawings, writings about suicide, and journal entries describing violent fantasies. The walls of her private world revealed a teenager fascinated by death. The most disturbing discovery, however, came when they found the 2 shallow graves behind the house. They were empty, but clearly prepared for something. Investigators' stomachs sank. They knew then that they weren't just dealing with a missing child. They were dealing with a likely murder. When Alyssa was brought in for questioning again, detectives pressed harder. At first, she denied everything. But the weight of evidence, and the relentless questioning, began to break her down. After hours of interrogation, Alyssa finally admitted the unthinkable. She told police she had strangled Elizabeth, stabbed her repeatedly, and cut her throat. Then, she led investigators to the shallow grave where she had buried the body. Even hardened officers were shaken by what they saw. There, in the cold ground beneath the leaves and dirt, lay Elizabeth Olten, the little girl everyone had been desperately searching for. The entire search party was devastated. Neighbors and volunteers who had been combing the woods just yards away broke down in tears when they learned the truth. For Elizabeth's family, the news was unbearable. Her mother collapsed, overcome with grief. What began as a missing child case had ended in tragedy, at the hands of a teenager who lived just down the street. But perhaps the most chilling moment of all came when investigators opened Alyssa's diary. Inside, written in her own handwriting, was a blow-by-blow account of the murder. The detached tone, the casual phrasing, and the chilling LOL at the end painted a portrait of a killer without remorse. The evidence was overwhelming. Alyssa Bustamante had carefully planned the crime, carried it out, and even documented it as if it were some kind of twisted experiment. Now, the case would move from investigation to the courts, and the question on everyone's mind was clear: how could a 15-year-old commit such a brutal act? And what would justice look like for Elizabeth Olten? When Alyssa Bustamante was arrested, the community of St. Martin's, Missouri, struggled to process the reality: the killer of a sweet 9-year-old child was a 15-year-old neighbor. The brutality of the crime, the premeditation, and the diary entries made it impossible to see Alyssa as just a troubled teen. Prosecutors faced a difficult decision: should she be tried as a juvenile or as an adult? Given the seriousness of the crime, the answer came quickly. Alyssa was charged as an adult with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. The courtroom was filled with grief-stricken family members and a stunned community, all waiting to hear how a teenager could commit such a calculated killing. During the proceedings, Alyssa's defense pointed to her history of depression, her difficult home life, and her struggles with mental health. But the prosecution had a much darker picture to present. This wasn't a sudden act of violence, it was a crime planned and executed in cold blood. They emphasized her diary entry: the callous LOL after describing the murder was impossible to ignore. The weight of evidence was crushing. In 2012, after years of legal wrangling, Alyssa accepted a plea deal. She pled guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action. The judge sentenced her to life in prison with the possibility of parole, plus an additional 30 years. For Elizabeth's family, there was no true sense of victory. Justice had been served in the eyes of the law, but their little girl was gone forever. As Elizabeth's mother said in court, "Our lives are shattered. We will never be the same." The murder of Elizabeth Olten left a wound in her community that will never truly heal. Over the years, Elizabeth's story has been retold as a tragic warning about the darkness that can hide behind even the most ordinary faces. Schools, parents, and communities reflected on what signs of mental distress or violent tendencies might have been overlooked. Alyssa Bustamante remains in prison, eligible for parole one day, though many continue to question whether someone capable of such an act should ever be released. For Elizabeth's family, the sentence could never equal the loss. Her absence lingers at every family gathering, every birthday, every holiday. But through grief, her loved ones have continued to honor her memory, ensuring she is remembered not just for the way her life ended, but for the light she brought into the world. Elizabeth's story is heartbreaking, disturbing, and unforgettable. And it reminds us all of the fragility of life and the importance of protecting the most innocent among us. If you found this story important, please like this video, subscribe to Noir Crime 88, and turn on notifications. We upload new true crime documentaries every second day, bringing you the stories that must never be forgotten.